CALIVEGANs, and welcome into another episode of the CALIVEGAN podcast. Today we have a guest, Dr. Matthew Nagra. He's a plant-based doctor. He's amazing. Like he's, these people that are so smart that make difficult things sound easy. He's the guy, and he's also very quick in punctual. So he's already here. So he's but and to make up the time, but he's already here. So let's wait a few moments for him to tune in. But hey, interesting thing that guys, I mentioned him in one of his interviews that he had with Hench Herbivore, and he was pointing at some study and about what's the benefit of eating more protein, comparing 0.8 grams of protein to 1.5 grams of protein. And the funny all right, now Dr. Nagara isn't able to join. Let's see, maybe you have some technical issues. No, here we are.
Hey,
Hello, mister. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thank you for coming in, man. You are amazing, putting out there a lot of good information, helping the plant-based community and debunking a lot of those, the carnivore movement, which is a crazy one, but it deserves to be debunked. So how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I was actually, I realized I was in the middle of typing a message saying I couldn't join, but I've been just clearing that. But yeah, I'm doing good. We have good weather here in Vancouver. Just got back from a little trip to Europe, which was fun, and kind of getting back in the swing of things.
Sounds good. We actually have bad weather here in south of Spain, Malaga, which is unusual, but it's also true that we have scarcity of water, so it's good that is raining actually. So first of all, just if you can give your background, what you specialize in, and also I'm sure that all the vegan audience that listening wants to know, like, how did you go vegan?
Okay, yeah. So I'm a naturopathic doctor. I'm here in Vancouver, BC, Canada, and I do focus a lot on nutrition counseling in my practice. I'm plant-based myself. I've been vegan for what is it now, 13 and a bit years, just over 13 years, I think. Um, and how I originally came to becoming vegan was actually started around when I was in my mid-teens. I had a personal trainer who really promoted more plant-based eating. It wasn't like 100% plant-based or anything, but was certainly leaning that direction. And after being quite hesitant for a while, I eventually started to incorporate some of his recommendations. I was cutting out a lot of the um, typical like ultra processed foods. I was eating potato chips, sodas, that sort of thing. And I also cut down on my meat intake and eliminated dairy. And I just started feeling better. I started losing weight. My skin seemed to clear up. My asthma seemed to be better at that point. And so I just started getting interested in, is this really the nutrition that's doing it? Is it something else? How can nutrition really impact our health? And from that point forward, over the next couple of years, I just started shifting more and more until eventually, about 2, 3 years after that, I went 100% plant-based, vegan, so to speak, and I've been vegan ever since. And at this point, it's not just about the health; it's certainly about the animals and to a degree the environment as well.
100%, yeah, because I've seen some of your posts with animals, so I was
Mhm.
curious about that as well. How did you make that connection with the animals? How did it start?
Yeah, so actually, that very same personal trainer told me, I think it was around when the movie came out, or at least when it really exploded and became popular, was Earthlings. He told me to watch
Mhm.
Earthlings. And so I had watched that, and of course I knew, some of what happens. I think everybody in the back of their mind knows that some things need to happen in order for you to eat meat, or other animal products. And so that really, turned on the light bulb, so to speak, and got me more, I guess, informed on the topic of what actually goes into our food. And from that point forward, I wouldn't even say that 100% got me on board with the sort of ethical side, but it certainly opened the door. And within the next year or two, I'd say the ethics really pushed me over the edge, and that is why I maintain a 100% plant exclusive diet at this point. And I would say, as a vegan, look, having some amount of animal products in your diet can be healthy. It can be fine. It's not like being 100% versus 95% is going to be all that much different when it comes to health outcomes. It is the animals that should really drive us to be 100%, or at least what drives me to be 100%.
Absolutely, absolutely. I never pushed my like results when it comes to strength and muscle to a vegan diet, because when I wasn't vegan, I was training, I got my first results like 5 to 10 kilogram of muscle, and I went vegan, I kept making results. And this is the main point I actually wanted to talk about today when we're going to get into protein, right? Because I think that there is a imbalance between how much talk there is around protein and how much little talk there is about training and the importance of progressive overload in order to stimulate the muscle to grow, and also with other trainings like running. In order to run longer and faster, you need to run longer and faster. And definitely nutrition supports that, but the stimulus is the main key factor. And I wanted to like shortcut. And actually, before, what is a now naturopathic
Oh,
doctor?
yeah, yeah. So I would say over in Spain, I'm not sure what sort of regulations there are, what would define, a naturopathic doctor, if anybody can call themselves a naturopath, or if it is a, regulated profession. But here in BC, Canada, it is a regulated profession. We have 4 years of undergrad typically, followed by 4 years of the naturopathic medical training. And we are primary care providers, so we do see and treat a lot of what a family doctor may. I can prescribe medications. I do prescribe medications. I send for blood tests. I do all of that stuff as well. But if someone needs a specialist, obviously they're going to go over to a medical doctor who's a specialist in a given field. But I do focus a lot on the diet and lifestyle side in the practice, and that's where I can kind of meld the two. Someone comes in with high cholesterol, I'm not just going to do the medication. I'm not just going to do the lifestyle.
Yeah.
I'm going to see what approach is best, and oftentimes that is a combination.
But that's definitely the needed shift that society need overall, because we have all of these doctors selling medications, and there obviously is a problem rooted in the lifestyle first that should be addressed. So going to the protein, I want to shortcut, because I think the common question, how much protein you need, it should be answered at this point. 0.8 gram per kilogram of body weight, considering the ideal weight, is what you need in order to be a healthy individual. If you're training, strength training, hypertrophy, between 1.2 1.6 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight, considering the ideal body weight, is what's suggested. After 1.6 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight, we don't see any more not relevant benefits. Correct? Do you buy that?
Yeah, with a few little modifications. So just to back up for a second, yeah, the recommended dietary allowance is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So that's if you take your weight in kilograms, you multiply it by 0.8. That is how much protein is recommended that you consume in a day. Now, there is some research out now, or at least over the past several years, that has suggested that going a bit higher may actually be beneficial, particularly for elderly individuals, for things like bone health, for example. And so some experts in the field of protein research are actually suggesting aiming for about 1.1, 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight as that added safety net. I would say it's not absolutely clear cut on what the best target is, but I think that's a really safe bet. I'd rather shoot a bit higher and not need it than shoot lower and actually be missing out on some benefits. Now, that being said, when it comes to, say, strength, you're right in that most of the gains that you're going to get that are attributed to added protein are going to, come from about 1.2 or so grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. But there is still a little bit more to gain by going higher to about 1.5, 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight with no clear benefit above that. In fact, if you're shooting above that, you're probably just consuming protein for the sake of consuming protein at that point. But none of that matters if you're not training. So that's the big one. Is there was a really interesting meta-analysis that came out, I think it was last year now, it might have been about a year and a half, 2 years now, by Tagawa was the lead author. And they did something where they split up studies into those that incorporated resistance training and those that didn't. And in those studies where people didn't incorporate resistance training but were increasing their protein intake, it had little to no effect. It was minuscule. So if you're sitting on your butt and you're increasing protein intake, you're not really doing much as far as your strength gains. However, if you incorporate resistance training and increase the protein intake, there are benefits to be had up to about 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. But even if you're eating a low protein diet and your resistance training, you can still make gains. You just might not make as many gains, right? So the resistance training is absolutely key, and that is the big take home.
Absolutely, and obviously expand on that. I would like to recall the interview you had with Herbivore, where you actually mentioned that these benefit in gains is about 8%.
Yeah, so sorry, I'd have to have the study up to say exactly, but I think the absolute gains are around 8% or so. But something to understand there is you're looking at studies conducted generally over a few months, sometimes longer. And you're seeing this, say, 8% gains. Over that time, that's not going to be all that much. However, what happens if you're training for 10 years? And that adds up, right? So these can be quite substantial over several years of training. But in a few months, you're probably not going to notice a huge difference.
Well, I actually would say the opposite, right? Because when it comes to like building muscle and strength, you will see an 8% being very significant in your first 1 to 2 years of training when you build most of your muscle, and then it becomes really a little help as you move forward. Of course, it might help you to speed up your way up to your genetic potential, right? But overall, it becomes little benefit. So do you think that's really?
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. You're saying like the relative gains. So like there's the newbie gains, so to speak. When you first start training, the amount of progression you see is generally larger. But those, again, newbie gains over the first couple months of training are not going to compare in absolute terms to the gains that you accrue over 10 years of training. Like if you take someone, let's think of it this way. You take someone who has never trained and you get them on a training program. In the first couple months, they'll see significant improvement. Now, what if you took someone who has been training for a couple months and then you watch their progression for 10 years? Who's going to have, like, as far as the number of pounds they're lifting, who's going to have a bigger number? The person who's trained for 10 years, like the difference, right? So the point being is that it's all relative. So relative to lower protein intake, consuming higher protein intake up to about 1.5, 1.6 grams does lead to, we'll say, again, I can't recall the exact number, it's around 8%, roughly an 8% increase compared to low protein, whether that's in the short term or ideally, in the long term as well. So I wouldn't say that the gains are lesser over the long term because they compound. It adds up, compared to that short-term period.
All right. Makes sense. I mean, I agree, that optimization of protein can give that benefits. And by the way, like I weigh about 82 kilograms right now. I have visible abs and my protein intake is usually between 110, 130. Right now I'm on a deficit and I'm doing 110. But the reason why it's important for me to make clear to people that, as you also said, that you both make gains with 0.8 and 1.5, is that for me, I think when it comes to building muscle strength, performance, training comes first, and that's going to give you the stimulus to make improvement.
Mhm.
And when it comes to diet, I think for me it's more important to focus on health. And I think the more whole plant food, the more health. So I don't like when a lot of fitness influencers suggest people to take away some of this whole plant food to implement protein shakes or fake meats or seitan. Not to say that those are unhealthy, but again, I think that the more whole plant food, the healthier you are, especially maybe a higher amount of fruits. Thoughts on
So
that?
I would push back a little bit, only that in saying that the benefits for most whole plant foods, they plateau. So when you
Okay.
look at if we look at all cause mortality, that's the risk of dying during a study. So you do 10-year study, you're looking at the risk of death during that period. You can kind of use it as a marker of like premature death, so to speak. If you look at the benefits there, for fruits, they seem to plateau around 2 servings a day. That doesn't mean more is bad. That just means that more isn't necessarily better. For vegetables, it's around 3 servings a day. For whole grains, most of the benefits come up to about 3 servings a day, but more may be better there. For legumes, around half to 1 serving a day. Although more, if you're a vegan, a lot of your protein is going to be coming from there. I generally recommend more legumes. And then for nuts and seeds, it's around 1 serving a day. So if you're hitting those, 2 servings of fruits, 3 of veggies, 3+ of whole grains, a serving of legumes and a serving of nuts and seeds, yeah, you can put in some stuff like some protein supplementation. You can
All right.
depending on what it is, some plant-based meat alternatives. Ideally, those that are lower in saturated fat being preferable. Um, Things like seitan, all of that. Those can all those can all help support increasing protein intake. And in fact, when we look at protein intake and mortality, we actually do find that those with higher protein intakes do tend to have a lower risk of mortality than those with lower protein intakes, possibly due to some of those benefits in older age that I had mentioned. Now, what's really cool though is when you break it down into the different sources of protein, it's specifically the plant protein sources that are of benefit, not so much the animal protein sources. And swapping even a little bit of animal protein with plant protein, like 3% of calories, can be of significant benefit. So yes, including whole or minimally processed plant foods is definitely a really good thing. But I don't know that 100% whole foods is better than, like, I don't know, 60-70% whole foods, as long as you're hitting those sort of targets that I laid out.
All right. Interesting that there is a so kind of ceiling for the benefit that you get from whole plant food. Um, and might be very useful for people that perhaps struggle with eating a lot of fibers, right? And in
Mhm.
general, eating a quantity of food. So they could implement more fake meats and implement those protein shake is going to help them then have better benefits and stick to their diet. Now, the other question would be if I am on a deficit. So if I'm on a deficit, I'm restricting my calories. So what's the priority? For me, again, a lot of people talk about increasing your protein intake as you're on a deficit to preserve lean muscle mass. I take my measurements. I do an average weight over 5 days, and I measure with a caliper my abdominal fat. So I know pretty well how my lean mass moves forward. And what I've noticed is that as long as my training is moving forward, uh, my lean mass is fine. So what happens is it lowers during the deficit, but that's also related to the depletion of glycogen, right,
Mhm.
in the muscle and the less food. But as soon as I go back to my 3,000 plus calories, then I notice that my lean mass is the same or maybe slightly up. So I think that when you're in a deficit, it can be very helpful. Well, first of all, as you restricted calories, again, I would prioritize health, so whole plant foods, rather than taking away plant food and implement fake meat or protein shakes. And also, I think that having more fruit during the deficit can help people manage hunger because you're eating lower calorie dense
Mhm.
food. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so like during the cutting phase, increasing protein, even beyond 1.5, 1.6 grams, like up into the twos, low 2 grams per kilogram, has been shown to help preserve lean mass during that time. However, going back to what we said before, the number one factor is continuing to resistance train. So while you're cutting calories, resistance training is number one. Yeah, upping protein is number two. But I would also say on this idea of wanting to emphasize whole plant foods during that time. I mean, yeah, of course, always healthy, but you have to remember that cutting is generally very short term. Like, how long are you in a cutting phase?
Uh, 2 months.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that what you eat during 2 months out of your entire life is going to be little to no impact on long-term
Yeah.
risks like cardiovascular disease and whatnot.
Yeah, I do
And yeah,
maximum of 4 months per
yeah,
year. Like that's the
like,
maximum month I do.
and so I mean, yeah, that might be actually over the course of a year, about a third of the year. That's not nothing. And you can still certainly emphasize those healthy plant foods, but I don't think you need to be as concerned with like absolutely hitting every one of those targets during those phases. It isn't a super long
Yeah.
term thing that you're doing. But whether someone wants to really jack up the protein intake like to those levels while in a calorie deficit, you're on a pretty restrictive diet of a lot of protein powders, probably a lot of seitan, things like that, and that just might not be super comfortable for someone to be living like that. So resistance training is number one, and if someone wants to preserve as much as possible, then yeah, upping protein intake might be something to consider as well.
All right. Sounds good. Now, this is a question I never know how to answer, really, because sometimes people come to me, actually yesterday, what's a good protein source that is not going to make me feel gassy
Mm.
or bloated? So, and when you hit me with that, I'm feeling like, plant-based food is full of fibers. I think that's usually the cause for bloating and gas. And my take is that people should wait some time to allow the body to adapt to the higher amount of fiber. Or my doubt is there some people that never adapts and will have problem forever?
So for starters, when someone says they have a symptom like bloating or gas, those are very non-specific, right? Like there are a million different conditions that can cause those sorts of symptoms. There could be sensitivities or intolerances to
Yeah.
all sorts of different foods. There can be non-celiac gluten sensitivity. There can be celiac disease, which is serious. It could be hypothyroidism. There are a number of different possibilities. So the first thing I would say is like, look, go get an evaluation, get these important markers investigated with your doctor, and see if there's anything obvious causing these concerns. Now, if we, let's say, rule all of that out, and it's nothing that can be identified, and it's probably coming down to specific foods, some sort of issue with digestion. And it's often, we'll say, legumes. I think that's the kind of primary one that people are worried about when they up their bean intake or lentil intake. In those cases, there are actually some studies looking at consumption of legumes, and people seem to adjust, so to speak. A lot of people within about a month, and most people by about 3 months of regular consumption. Now, ideally, you don't want to be struggling with those symptoms for a few months, and so
Yeah.
it might be best for people to slowly up their intake and slowly transition into more and more legumes. At the same time, there are some options that may be lower in some of the compounds causing those symptoms. Tofu would be a great example, generally very well tolerated, unless you have like a soy allergy or something.
In this case, in this question, the guy also
Okay.
said no soy.
Yeah, and so, well, I mean, again, for a specific case, I would need a lot more
Yeah.
detail to really hone in on it. But look, there's soy-based products, there's lentil-based products, bean-based products, there's pea-based products, there's wheat-based products like seitan. There's different sorts of. I actually recently got these textured pea protein little chunks that are kind of meaty as well, really good. So there's a bunch of different options. There's protein powders. It goes on and on. But what actually seems to trigger the flatulence, the gas from legume consumption, most of all, are three compounds called raffinose, stachyose, and verbascose. And these are oligosaccharides, so they're types of carbohydrate compounds that we don't break down. It's actually the microbes in our gut that break them down. And when you up your intake of them in a short period, it can lead to a lot of gas formation as we're struggling to properly metabolize them. Now, there are things that you can do to lower the amounts of those in foods. One of the big ones is soaking beans overnight. So soaking them for 12 to even 16 hours to really reduce the amounts of those compounds the most. Obviously, if you're buying canned, you can't necessarily do that, but I would rinse it until it's really clear running through, or the water's really clear running through. And then, like I said, starting with smaller servings and slowly building from there. But I want to be cautious when talking about these types of things because it is so non-specific. There could be a million different things going on, and I would say first and foremost, go get investigated by your doctor and maybe work with a dietitian to actually construct a plan to slowly increase intake. It's a long road. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily a overnight switch.
I would have loved to have some kind of guidance in this when I went plant-based because, when I went plant-based and, I was really worried about my protein. And so I was eating a lot of legumes, and I literally had a period in which I was shitting blood, and I feared being too far from a toilet, and that was from too many legumes intake and fibers in general. So one thing that helped me at the time was going from whole grain carbs to just the more processed version that helped at the time.
And
So I
yeah, just on that note, I just want to put out there, if anyone has blood in their stool, see a doctor. Could be something serious. Just
uh,
putting that out there to
yeah,
clarify.
yeah, it wasn't nice, and hopefully I healed from that. But I think that should be emphasized as well, the fact that it is worth it to make this process of allowing your body to adapt, right? Because there is a correlation between fibers intake and the reduction of all cause mortality.
Mhm.
Is that correct?
Oh yeah, it's like
Is that
linear up to quite a high
is that a
point.
ceiling? Is that a
So
ceiling on that too?
so it's actually more or less linear. I mean, there's a little bit of a curvature to the what we call dose response curves, but it seems to be sort of more is better. But at really high intakes, we don't have a lot of data, right? So when you think about the populations generally being studied, I mean, most people consume quite a low amount of fiber. So there is a ceiling to the types of doses of fiber that we are able to study on a wide scale because we don't have huge populations of people consuming 50, 60 grams of fiber a day plus, right?
Yeah.
But I would generally say, at least up until that point, certainly well beyond what is typically recommended, that yeah, there are benefits. So I would certainly shoot higher than the typical recommendations, which depending on if you're female is 25 grams, if you're male 38 grams. I think 50 grams or so is a really good target to aim for.
That's great. All right, let's talk about a good day of plant-based eating. So this is what I eat. So morning time, I have cereals with blueberry and oat milk with the coffee. I'll be snacking on one piece of fruit and maybe 20 grams of nuts in the morning. Then my lunch would be about 100 grams of carbs, might be rice, with 300 grams of vegetables. Today I had mushrooms, sometimes red peppers, with about 200 grams of lentils. Then my snack would be some soy yogurt with, again, two pieces of fruit, some dark chocolate. And then in the evening, I would have a raw salad, like dark leafy greens with a tomato, some cruciferous vegetables, and again, some carbs that might usually is bread or some instant noodles. I know it's bad, it's processed. I do like instant noodles though. And yeah, what do you think it's missing? I would have hemp seeds in the salad too.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, overall, those sound for the most part to be quite healthy foods. I mean, it sounds like protein might be low relative to what I would typically aim for, but otherwise, I mean, those seem like healthy foods. And
Okay,
it's
what would
actually
you change?
interesting. One thing I would note is I'm super jealous of the fact that you have soy yogurt because we don't have good soy yogurt here in Canada. I've never seen it anywhere. And whenever I'm over in the UK or Europe, the All Pro soy yogurts are phenomenal. So I'm waiting for those to get over here. But otherwise, yeah, diet wise, seems generally pretty healthy. I'd just probably, for me, I would up protein intake, but that's probably
Well,
about it.
I do get 110 grams of
Oh,
protein
you
from that.
calculate it. Okay. Yeah, sounds pretty good then.
Yeah. And when it comes to the omega-3 and 6s, that's why I implement seeds, because I know it's got the best balance of omega-3 and 6s. Is balance important? And
Not.
no, right?
No, no. So yeah, so no, that's there is actually like no research clearly showing that a ratio matters. What seems to matter is the total amount or the overall amount. So if you're eating enough of the omega-3 fats, the ALA found in things like walnuts, hemp seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds, to a degree in like soy products, then having more omega-6s doesn't seem to matter. So this whole idea of the ratio, I have no idea how it's gotten such traction,
Selling
but the research just is
supplement.
not. Yeah, I was gonna say the research is just not there to support it. Now there is some debate to be had around supplementing additional long chain omega-3s, which are the types of omega-3s you would typically get from fish, and now we have algae-based supplements for vegans as well. There's some debate to be had around that. I think during pregnancy, it's fairly clear that there are benefits for pregnancy outcomes, and I would say through breastfeeding potentially as well. In people at risk of cardiovascular disease, maybe in people with like early signs of cognitive decline, maybe. But the research on just generally very healthy populations isn't crystal clear, and we unfortunately don't have a lot of research on vegan and vegetarian populations who supplement. So I would like to see that to really see, if there is a benefit, if so, how much of a benefit. But I think as a precautionary measure, it's a reasonable thing to include or to consider including on sort of a case-by-case basis.
Sounds good. Yeah, well, this was one of the questions if from my audience, if omega-3 supplements is necessary, but for what I understand is more of an optimization for women in pregnancy and feeding. But in general, nuts and seed would provide those healthy fats.
Potentially, yeah. Like that would be, I think, a fair conclusion to draw based on existing literature, but I also wouldn't rule out a benefit. And I would say that if someone wants to take the precautionary measure and just ensure that if there is a benefit, they are getting that, then a supplement would be reasonable. But I am not in the camp of saying it's necessary.
All right.
Like, let's say a B12.
Yeah, because like there's this vegans need a lot of supplements, and I only take B12, and in my stance here is that you need B12 because obviously that comes from bacteria, and we sanitize everything that we eat, so it's not present. There's a lot of people that don't get enough sunlight, whether you live in a dark country or you just live in an office all day and you don't go for a walk, so there might be good to supplement vitamin D. And for the rest, I think the best practice is just going to get your blood test done and see if you actually need the supplements. So what's your take on supplementation in general?
Yeah, I mean, you can always test things like iron, your B12, vitamin D, see where you're at. I mean, B12 is a pretty safe bet to be taking just because we don't really get it unless you're consuming fortified foods regularly. So I do think that's something that pretty much every vegan should consider. Vitamin D, I mean, I live in Canada. We get, sunshine for a few months out of the year, but other than that, it's important to supplement. Now, as far as other nutrients, again, it comes back to this idea of like as a precautionary measure, taking a multivitamin isn't a bad idea. Is that absolutely necessary? Probably not for a lot of people, but it does help cover one's bases. So I would again treat that as sort of a precautionary measure to just to help meet your needs or help ensure you're meeting your needs, but not necessary unless you know that there are certain gaps in the diet. Like some people don't like consuming fortified milks, in which case, upping calcium through supplementation could be really important if you're not getting enough in the diet. For some people, they don't use iodized salts or iodized products for some reason. They'll choose sea salts or whatever. In those cases, perhaps an iodine supplement is reasonable. And again, you can just get all these things in a multivitamin, which is a really easy way to cover your bases.
All right. So just to make sure one person could just take the multivitamin and that's it. Um,
If it's well formulated, that's the one thing. You have to kind of know what nutrients you're trying to hit, and what sort of amounts are there, which is why if there are any concerns around this, working with a professional is probably a good idea.
Sounds good. Yeah, and so going back to the calcium, because one of the question was, what are some recommendations for women in menopause? They want to promote bone health, and what I know is that dark leafy green have the most minerals to 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 promote bone health, right? And but you were talking about fortified milk. So is it not possible to get enough minerals to support bone health from just plants?
For calcium, I wouldn't say it's not possible. I'd say it's very hard to just rely on food, other non-fortified food sources. When you think about hitting 1,000 milligrams per day, which is the recommendation here for the average adult, I mean, that's about just over 3 cups of a fortified milk, or I'd have to do the math, but many, many, many cups of dark leafy greens. It would be tough to meet those. I mean, tofu provides a decent amount as well, especially if it's calcium set, but that is again a fortified sort of food. Um, Now, for postmenopausal women, what's interesting is there has been some research suggesting that vegan women are at higher risk of fracture compared to non-vegetarian women. Um, but there seem to be a few factors that were maybe not properly considered in the Epic Oxford study, which is where that really came from. So the big one being that the higher risk of fracture may have actually been driven by more of the vegan women being underweight and potentially significantly underweight, and that is a huge risk factor for fracture or for weak bones essentially. And so maintaining a healthy weight is important. Now, resistance training is again super important, and the group of individuals where that risk was seen were those who were not very physically active. So that's a huge one as well. Now, fast forward about, I think, 3/4 of a year or so, and the Adventist Health Study 2 came out, also looking at the risk of hip fracture. And once again, there was no significant risk in men, but there was in women who were peri to postmenopausal. And now there was about, I think it was a 43%. No, sorry, that was Epic Oxford. I can't remember the numbers. I think it was a 55% higher risk of fracture for vegan women compared to non-vegetarian women. But when you actually limited the analysis to only those who supplemented vitamin D and calcium, there was no significant risk. And in fact, if
Mhm.
anything, the vegans might have even been at a slightly lower risk. And so that just further reemphasizes, yeah, we want to make sure we're getting adequate vitamin D. We want to make sure we're getting adequate vitamin C, whether that's through, I'm sorry, not vitamin C, calcium, whether that's through fortified foods or supplements, to just help bolster that. And actually, calcium needs in menopause are higher. It gets bumped up to 1,200 milligrams, which is about 4 cups of fortified milk a day. Now, you're going to get some of that through your diet. You might get, say, 500 milligrams or so through the diet, so it's not like you need to supplement the full 1,200 milligrams. But to get over that hump, supplements or fortified foods are really important. They're really useful tools.
All right. Interesting. And glad you emphasized the exercise part as well, because, my grandmother, she died, and she died because she had different bone structure, bone fractures, and she's Italian, and, like there was cheese all the time. So I don't think she wasn't getting enough calcium, but she still had very weak bones. So I think it's very important that people understand that, nutrition supports your health, but you need to use your body to make it stronger.
Um,
And now
Actually, just
staying
just 1 second. There was a comment I want to address.
go
There was a question about vitamin K and bone health. So yeah, the question is about vitamin K, and so there's different types of K. There's K1, which we get from like leafy greens, and then there's K2, which we actually make in our bodies from K1 and from some of the microbes in our gut. But we don't really get K2 in the diet. So even if you're eating animal foods that contain K2, they contain a type of K2 that we just don't really absorb unless you're having ridiculously high doses, which you're not going to get from most foods. Now, one type of K2 that we can absorb is actually in a fermented soy product called natto. So that's actually the highest source of vitamin K2, and it's a plant. But that being said, it's not an essential nutrient. It's not that we need vitamin K2. K1 is one that we do need. But there are some studies looking at vitamin K2 supplements and bone health. And where we do see some benefit is particularly in postmenopausal women with osteopenia or osteoporosis. So in that group of postmenopausal women with like pre-existing concerns around their bone health, supplementing vitamin K2 does seem to help improve that. So that is a demographic where K2 supplements might be considered. But in otherwise, healthy individuals, in men, I've yet to see any good data suggesting that it actually improves markers of bone health.
All right. So for postmenopausal women, it is suggested to increase the calcium intake, perhaps taking a supplement, as well as vitamin K2. Sounds good. So let's validate or debunk a myth, because our friend Gary Yourofsky, in his famous speech, and I heard this from other people, talks about how animal protein makes the blood acidic, and to balance the acidity of the blood, the body will take some minerals out of the bones. True?
No,
No.
so we have studies now looking at like excretion of calcium, and so basically what you can do is you can label certain nutrients. So you can you label calcium with sort of like a tag essentially, so you can measure it being excreted in places like urine. So you can actually see where it goes in the body and where it's excreted. And so what we see is that the calcium, some of it that's been excreted, is actually coming from the calcium that was consumed. It's not like it's removing calcium from the bones. That's not how it works. And so that is just a complete myth that has been debunked over and over again. And it's also sort of propagated by this idea that, the countries with the highest dairy consumption also tend to have the highest fracture rates, right? But that's what we call an ecological association. Like it's very difficult to determine cause and effect. Maybe it's because they have higher fracture risk or higher risk of osteoporosis that people then increase their calcium intake, right? It could be backwards. It's not necessarily that the higher calcium intake is causing those concerns. And we have randomized controlled trials where you increase calcium intake and you see improvements in bone mineral density. So so it's just a kind of a misunderstanding of what the data actually shows. So no, dairy consumption does not rob your bones of calcium.
All right, all right. That's a huge myth, I think, that's
Yeah,
going around
yeah.
sometimes. And I've never heard these, the opinion and the actual science from a doctor. So that was a good one. Now, when I share my food and my plates with beans and pasta and my broccoli, I get a lot of your blood sugar is going to spike, and that's bad. So I think that fears it's related to diseases like diabetes, right? But I also understand that blood, spiking blood sugar are not necessarily bad. What's bad is having a consistent high blood sugar that is caused from cholesterol plaque in the arteries
Quite.
that doesn't allow the sugar to be absorbed from the body. And does it make sense? Is that
No,
how it works?
so that's not entirely correct. So the cholesterol doesn't have an impact there, but so just going back to this idea of blood sugar spikes. So when you eat a food with carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes up as the carbohydrates are brought into the bloodstream, and then it goes back down. That's normal. That's what should happen, right? Your blood sugar goes up, your body recognizes that, you secrete insulin. Insulin then tells your cells, hey, there's a bunch of sugar out here, you need to take it in, do something with it. And then it brings it back down, and that is perfectly normal, perfectly healthy. What is a problem is when, it is chronically elevated. So it goes up, but then your body struggles to bring it back down. That is caused by primarily an excess body fat, especially fat accumulation in the liver and pancreas. That is what leads to that issue. That's why weight loss is actually the most powerful lifestyle tool we have for improving insulin resistance and ultimately diabetes. In fact, it was the DIRECT trial, I believe it was called. They put people on a very low calorie diet. It was like meal replacements and vegetables for a period of, I think it was a couple months. I'd have to go back and check, but the vast majority of them who achieved substantial weight loss, either 10 or 15 kilograms of weight loss, actually put their type 2 diabetes into remission, which is pretty wild. Of course, once they, over the following couple years, kind of got back to a normal sort of diet that they were eating and regained some weight, well, then their blood sugars crept back up, and that's kind of expected. So that is the primary issue there. But what is really concerning is that people will look at this idea of, well, that food contains carbohydrates and it'll raise blood pressure, blood sugar, and they'll demonize foods like oats. Well, oat consumption is actually associated with a lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And instead of oats, they'll eat something like eggs, they'll eat bacon, they'll eat whatever that is low in carbohydrates or has no carbohydrates, but is high in calorie density, perhaps depending on how it's prepared. And that can actually worsen the issue long term. So, and certainly increase risk of things like cardiovascular disease, especially with the processed meat. So it's actually leading some people to make poorer health decisions around their nutrition and avoiding really healthy foods, which is just not supported by any of the data that we have on the topic.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Thanks for sharing that. And actually, the main question that I wanted to say are finished. I know you've been debunking a lot of carnivores. So if you want to comment on that, like what's going on there? Why does this movement even exist? And what's your main point to debunk the fact that eating all of this red meat is healthy? Which, by the way, I've seen most of these big influencers like Paul Saladino, and then there's the other Baker or something.
Mm-hmm.
Sean Baker, is that the name? Yeah, and they all started to implement more carbs in their diet. So they're kind of starting from 100 years ago, right? And finding out themselves that eating only red meat is unhealthy. So yeah, what's your main point?
So I think the reasons people end up choosing a carnivore diet are quite varied. I think, a part of it is that you have people, some people like the Liver King, for example, are, jacked up on steroids and saying, all of that. And promoting this lifestyle as, the reason for their physique and whatever. And that can maybe influence some impressionable people, especially young boys, men, to adopt that sort of diet. That's the one side. Another is that they're really good storytellers. So they'll often share stories of individuals who, quote unquote, reversed all of their diseases by adopting this carnivore diet. But in reality, you can't actually draw the line from the diet to the outcome, the improvement in their condition. It could have been that it would have gotten better anyway. It could have been that it's simply just the weight loss that they, if you go on a diet that's literally one food, you're probably going to lose weight. And it could be the weight loss that led to improvements. It could be that they could have achieved those benefits by a number of different dietary patterns. And it could be that another dietary pattern would have been even better for them. Like there's so many variables there that aren't considered. And oftentimes these are people doing a lot of other things, exercising it and so on as well. But they will share these stories in a way that really points towards the diet specifically being the reason for these short-term improvements. On the same hand, we have to look at what happens long-term, and we simply don't know. In fact, Sean Baker himself has said he doesn't know. In fact, I made a video about that, and he made a response video. He wasn't very happy about it seemed. But he actually openly stated that, we don't have the data. Well, then why are you recommending that? Like, imagine this. I'm just going to paint a picture for a second. Imagine this. We don't have the data we have on smoking that we do today. And I want to be clear, I'm not comparing eating meat to smoking as far as health outcomes. I'm just drawing a comparison on the type of logic that is used. But imagine we didn't have the data on smoking that we do today, and people started smoking and they started losing weight. Smoking, is an appetite suppressant.
Yeah.
Start losing weight. Maybe they notice some changes.
I chew on nicotine chewing gum, actually, which slow down hunger as well.
But imagine they, start noting things like mental clarity, or anecdotally say that their mood improves, or what have you. And because of the weight loss, maybe they notice some other benefits. Would it be reasonable, without the long-term data, to say that this is a healthy intervention for you to do? Probably not. And now it's actually worse, because with red meat, we do have data on harms at even a serving of like one a day. Right? Well, a serving a day increases risk of cardiovascular disease. It seems to increase risk of colorectal cancer, but they're recommending 5, 6, 7 servings a day.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, your risk goes up to about a serving plus a day, and then it just drops off a cliff. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And so that is a part of why it's so dangerous, and how the data we do have points towards it being pretty risky. And it seems to just get ignored, even though people like Baker will openly admit that they don't have long-term data.
Yeah, they're kind of dishonest, and I don't know if they're just selling their product, or just creating a narrative around people that love meat, and so they relate to this diet. Oh yes, only meat. But yeah, they definitely don't make any sense. But Dr. Nagra, what do you eat in a day?
Oh, I mean, I'm going to say I just got back from Germany like 2 days ago. So my diet, I'm doing grocery shopping today. So my diet's a little off. But generally speaking, what I eat is maybe breakfast. I'll have oatmeal. I'd say that's probably my most common breakfast. Oatmeal with berries, flax seeds. Might throw some cocoa powder, protein powder in to up the protein and add some flavor. For lunch, it'll vary depending on the day. I might do just a big smoothie. And when I mean big smoothie, like I fill the Vitamix. Some berries, some greens, soy milk, hemp seeds, banana. I'm trying to think of what else I throw in there. Maybe some more protein powder, some matcha powder. I love matcha. Or I'll have a sandwich with whole wheat toast and smoked tofu, maybe hummus or like a vegan mayo with avocado and some tomatoes, some greens. Pretty simple, but
Sounds
it's
good.
quite big when I put it all together. And then for dinner varies the most. I tend to do like lentil pastas. I love those. So I'll do like a lentil pasta with tomato sauce, and I'll make like a cashew cream to make it like a creamy tomato sauce, and then throw in a bunch of veggies. Or I might do a stir fry with tofu or soy curls. Or actually tonight, no, I'm going to start it tonight. I'm going to probably have it tomorrow. I'm going to make my friend Plant You, Carly Bodrog. You guys might know her, Plant You, on Instagram. I just got her new cookbook, and so I'm going to try some of the seitan ribs that she had in there. So I'm planning to pick up some groceries for that, and I'll share about it once I make it.
Sounds good. Sounds healthy and tasty. And what are 5 top advices that you give to people in order to be healthier?
Oh,
Because I
5. That's a lot. So, I mean, generally speaking, like if I was to, okay, for one, I would say increasing fruit and vegetable intake. I guess that's kind of 2, but I'll put it into 1. So just focusing on increasing fruit and veg intake is a good idea. 2, emphasizing plant protein over animal protein. With few exceptions, choosing plant protein over animal protein is beneficial for long-term health. Regular exercise. So this doesn't have to be spending 2 hours in the gym lifting weights. This can be, depending on your schedule, if you're busy, going maybe a couple times a week and doing some sort of lifting, like incorporating both resistance and I would say some aerobic training as well. But as little as that, or what we call exercise snacks. Like if you just have a 15-minute break through the day, just doing some stuff in your living room if you have to, some push-ups, some jump squats, some whatever it is you can fit in, going for a walk, or around a few blocks or something. Those are all things that you can incorporate and are all generally beneficial. On the beverage side, incorporating things like coffee or tea, obviously based on your tolerance to caffeine. If you're choosing coffee or not, some people I know aren't super tolerant. But coffee and tea as preferred beverages, in addition to water, seem to be quite beneficial for not just cardiovascular health, diabetes risk, but also cognitive function. And I think that was 5, or am I missing 1? I'm just like rattling them off now.
Yeah. There was. So sounds good. Thank you, Dr. Nagra. Do you want to send people to some particular place where you have resources?
Yeah, so I mean, I share. I'm going to post one right after this. I actually share little clips on new studies and whatnot on my Instagram page. I also share them on YouTube, TikTok, just kind of all over the place. I also have a paper coming out in the Canadian Journal of Cardiology very soon on plant-based meat alternatives. So follow me if you want to know when that drops, and I'll do a video on it, kind of highlighting the main findings, which I I don't think I can share too much about yet, but anyways, that'll be coming soon. And then I do have like a cholesterol lowering handout that's free to download through the link in my bio as well. And feel free to send me a message if you have other questions, and hopefully I can point you in the right direction.
Sounds good. So thank you for coming, man. It was a very nice chat, very informative. You debunked some myths that I had for myself. I probably changed my mind about some stuff. And but yes, I'm glad we agree that exercise is very important, and it comes before the protein intake. That's it. Might do this again in the future. It was very nice to meet you, man.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on and keep up the good work. I was checking out some of your workout videos and everything. It looks pretty fun. So yeah, keep it up.
Sounds good. Bye, guys. Thanks for watching. And you can find it if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment. If you have enough comments with questions, we are going to make another one based on those questions. And the same thing for Instagram. Like, comment, share it on your story with your whole family and friends, so they know better how to take care of their health. Bye, everyone. See you in the next one.